Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill and I'm back out in my vegetable garden because it's time for the August vegetable garden tour. I did one in June, I did one in July, and so I think you're going to find that some things have changed out here. So you're looking at the first row of our raised beds and you'll notice there's an empty bed right off the bat. That is the lettuce bed, and the lettuce did not like the heat, so they're done. The second bed was the pea bed. They didn't like the heat either, and so they're out of there. And the third bed was where we had our Walla Walla sweet onions, and they are finished growing, so we pulled them up and we're drying them. This next bed is our potato bed. That's where we're growing bluebell and Viking purple potatoes. You can see the plants are looking quite good. They're falling over a little bit, but otherwise the foliage looks good. We're just going to let them keep growing until they get frosted in the fall. In the next bed, I've got kind of a mixed planting going, which is okay. The plant on the right is a Chef's Choice orange tomato, one of my favorite varieties. And if you look, you'll notice that one of them is starting to turn orange, which is great. Directly to their left is my zinnia patch. I love zinnias because they attract pollinators, they make great cut flowers, and they add a lot of color to the garden. I've got some interesting varieties this year. Directly to the left are sunflowers. It's just a small patch. And boy, these guys got off to a tough start. The birds kept pecking at them. But they're finally coming into their own, and I'm hoping they'll start blooming soon. In the next bed, I've got the floating row cover over it because it's Swiss chard and beets, which are very susceptible to leaf miners. I've uncovered it just for you. And we need to pick them again. As soon as they fill up again, we clip off a bunch of the leaves, and then we take them inside and process them to save for later. There are beets to the left, by the way. And then in this last bed, I've got carrots and parsnips. Nothing really exciting to tell you about them, except that they're growing well, and we won't harvest them for quite a while. In the second row, we have our hoop house. You might recall that we're growing peppers in here. These are the sweet peppers. They are doing beautifully. And check out some of these bell peppers. They are amazing. This is stuff enough. We've never grown the variety before, but it's huge. And then back on the other side, sorry if I make you dizzy here, this is the bed that has all of the hot peppers. And they are doing amazingly well. I am so impressed with how well peppers grow inside of the hoop house. We just might have to do that every year because we always move it around, so that way we rotate our crops. The next bed is our broccoli bed, and we've harvested all of the main heads, but the side shoots are coming up, and so that's what we're in the process of harvesting now. In the next bed, first of all, there are the trombone zucchinis, which are climbing up on the wooden supports I gave them, but not quite as well as I would like. But that's okay. And they're just starting to produce some fruits. And then, of course, I have the Claremore zucchini bed. That's a light-skinned zucchini. It's very flavorful, very tender, and definitely my favorite summer squash. Next is the tomato and cucamelon bed. I've got two different sun gold tomato plants here. The one on the left is the grafted one that a friend gave me, and the one on the right is one that I grew from seed. They seem to be about neck and neck as far as production and growth, but it's always fun to test them. You might recall my goofy cucamelon rocket, which is this support that you're looking at that I made from a bunch of branches and vines. And I'm using it to grow cucamelons and lunchbox cucumbers. And as you can see, they're growing pretty well, really, But the cucamelons are typically very slow at getting started. They finally seem to understand that, oh, you're supposed to grow up this support. So I have high hopes that we'll be getting some soon, and I'll certainly let you know when that happens. And I already have a couple of cucumbers from the lunchbox ones, which is great. Now this next bed is going to look quite different to you. This is where we were growing garlic. The garlic has been pulled up and it is drying in our shop on a tarp. But we've also picked all of the onions that are done growing in a neighboring bed, and they're lying here drying out a little bit, but I do want to move them to a better place for drying as well. Those are those copra onions. And then this last bed is one of the melon beds. This is actually Tuscan Napoli, and if you hold on one second, I'll show you what they look like. They're really quite pretty. Here we go. I counted 14 in this bed. They have a nice netted surface. The flavor is to die for. Here's our pole bean arbor, and this has been an interesting lesson for us this year. Ordinarily, they are very productive. They have not been so productive this year, but they're not getting quite as much sunlight as they should, and I am certain that that's telling me they need more light. So we will not rotate into this north bed again. We'll just keep moving the pole bean arbor around the garden so that they get plenty of sunlight. Now in the same bed, I also have basil growing. It's getting off to a rather slow start this year. I think, again, it's because of the lack of sunlight. It's amazing how important light is, right? And then if you bear with me a moment, I'm going to go around to the north side of the bed because I haven't shown you this before. But this is where I'm growing celery plants. These are tango celery, my favorite variety. They're very easy to grow, and you can see they're coming along nicely. Now a lot of people probably think, why in the world would you grow your own celery when you can just buy a bundle of it in the grocery store? Well, I'll tell you why. Typically what happens when I buy store-bought celery is that I will eat a few stalks of it and then I forget about it, and then it rots in my vegetable drawer of my refrigerator. So this way I can just harvest what I need, the plant keeps growing, and I just use it as I need it. So this works much better. There's no waste, and at the end of the season I'll chop up what's left over and put it into a freezer bag and use it later in soups and stews. In this next bed, I'm growing another tomato plant called Mortgage Lifter. I have a few peppers tucked in, some zinnias, and also I have this tiny little plant here. This is one that was sent to me by a nursery, and it's called Garden Gem. You can see that the tomatoes are ripening. The oddball thing is that this plant is tiny, yet the tag says it will grow 2 to 3 feet tall. So it's a little more petite size for a tomato plant, but it's certainly staying pretty low. And of course, if you look at the stakes I put around it, I had high hopes for it to grow a lot taller, but that's okay. And then down here, around another one of my obelisks, is the Malabar spinach. This is another plant that has gotten off to a really rough start. I was having problems with something eating the seedlings. I had planted the seeds directly in the garden, and I don't know if it was pill bugs or slugs or birds or what. But I finally had to start them indoors, get them off to a little bit of a better start. I planted them out in the garden a couple of weeks ago, and they are looking much better. So hopefully they will start climbing the obelisk soon. I've heard from readers who say that it's delicious and also very pretty. So I like both of those components in my garden. I had to back up a bit so you could see part of our corn patch. We're growing 2 beds of Sweetness bicolor corn, and it's doing really, really well. You'll notice that I have planted it very thickly. You know, conventional wisdom says that you plant the rows 3 feet apart and the plants within the rows 18 to 24 inches apart, and yet I plant mine a foot apart in all directions. And that's one of the great things about raised beds, is that you can plant more intensively. Now, if you saw one of my recent videos, you know that I staked and twined the beds, and that is to protect them from the wind. We occasionally get some pretty good windstorms here, and it is to keep the plants from snapping over in the wind. This bed has the last of the copra onions growing in it, and also on the end are Italian torpedo onions, which are really nice. And then the last bed in this row is where I have Ha Ogan honeydew melons growing. We've never grown them before, but we think that they're going to be really great. And you can see there are all sorts of little melons growing. I counted, and there's 14 melons in this bed too, so there's going to be a lot of melons to harvest. This tangled mess is our winter squash and pumpkin bed. And before I move on and explain a couple things about it, I wanted to point out this little guy here. So this is a pumpkin variety I've never grown before. It's called Red Warty Thing, and I thought it would be kind of fun to do, and especially to decorate with in the fall. So we'll see how that goes. I think they're pretty slow growers. Now, the thing about this bed is you might notice there are a lot of pale looking leaves. And one of the things we discovered was that the bed was really not getting enough water. At first we thought maybe it was a disease, but the weather has been very warm. We thought we were giving the bed enough water, but I guess not. So we've taken care of that, and now the plants seem to be doing much better. So another type of a squash I'm growing that's new to me this year is something called cushaw. We have some friends whose wife is from the south, and she said she grew up eating those and they were fabulous. And so I thought, well, I have to give that a try. I don't know how well they're going to do here in the Northwest, but I'm giving it a shot. I'm also growing a type of sugar pumpkin. And then if you look in this little tangled mass of leaves, I'm growing butternut squash as well. Here's my tomato patch, and it is doing really well. This is where I primarily grow paste tomatoes, and that's for making sauce, ketchup, and salsa. Pretty soon I'm going to start my pruning routine so that I get the maximum amount of tomatoes before we start getting our fall frost. And that will be the topic of a future video, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But the other thing I wanted to show you is this beefsteak style tomato that I'm growing, and these are Atlas hybrid. I got the seeds from Burpee, and look at the size of the tomatoes. They're huge. So I'm really excited to see how they do, and of course how they taste. This is my other bed of corn because we're growing a little bit more than we usually do. And this is also sweetness bicolor. So I've done some staking of them. I have one more batch of twine to run around the perimeter of the bed to give them some support. And then that's all I need to do with them. But they're coming along really nicely too. I hope you enjoyed this tour of our vegetable garden in August. I'm going to sign off now because I need to carefully inspect these blackberries. I'll see you in a week.